Why, hello, friends. It's a pleasure to see you again. Have you been well since the last time that we were together? I do hope so. We care ever so much about each and every one of you. Bigs, talls, littles, smalls, we're glad that you can come here and share our stories with us. Speaking of stories, how have you been enjoying The Forgotten Door, eh? Many interesting goings on in the courtroom last time, eh? Now, in Chapter 10, we wonder what will happen as the Beans return home. Will the Macklins have kept their mouths shut as Miss Josie ordered? Or will they have blabbed to the newspapers and made the situation worse? Tempers are certainly running high, aren't they? What will happen? We don't know, but we're about to find out. But first, are you ready yet? Do you have your mug, or your pipe, or your bowl, or your stuffy, or your blankie, or your spouse, or your significant other nearby? If not, go and get them. We'll be right here waiting for you. Everyone ready now? Excellent. Now then, sit back, relax, put your best listening ears on as we listen to Chapter 10 of The Forgotten Door. The Forgotten Door by Alexander Key. Illustrated by Dom Lupo. Chapter 10. He is Threatened. Miss Josie took a pair of glasses from her bag, wiped them, put them on, and unfolded the paper. It was filled with Thomas's small, neat handwriting, the facts carefully arranged as if he were making an official report. As she read, her mouth opened slightly and she bit down on her lower lip. Other than that, she gave no indication of the shock and astonishment that little John knew she felt. Thomas had listed all that the Beans knew about him. The way that he had learned English, his ability to speak to animals, his strange clothing, his total ignorance of some things, and his familiarity with others. It was a long list, and Thomas had even given the value of the gems in little John's knife and clip. Nothing had been omitted but the cave. Thomas had headed the paper, Secret, for Judge Josephine Cunningham. At the bottom he had added, after exhausting all possibilities, we are convinced that John is an accidental visitor from another planet. He is sure of this himself. A few scraps of returning memory give proof of it and indicate how he arrived and how he may be returned. We are working on that now. Our main problem is to avoid further publicity and give him a chance to get his memory back. Our one fear is that some government agency may learn of his abilities and take him away and hold him for study. We feel this would be a tragedy. Please help us any way you can. Thomas Jameson Bean. Miss Josie read the paper a second time. Anderson Bush crossed and recrossed his legs, and Mr. McPhee began tapping his fingers impatiently on the table beside him. Miss Groom seemed to be swelling momentarily. Little John knew she was bursting with resentment and curiosity. Suddenly, Miss Groom said,
Miss Josie, if this boy, whatever his name is a welfare case, I have a right to know whatever there is to know about him.
Miss Josie ignored her. Before saying anything, she carefully folded the paper and put it in her handbag with her glasses. She looked thoughtfully at Thomas, and then her eyes met little John's. He smiled back at her, and knew he had another conspirator on his side.
Thomas, she murmured, it's fortunate I've known you as long as I have. You did a lot of intelligence work in the Marines, didn't you?
Yes, Miss Josie. She turned to Miss Groom.
John is not a welfare case,
she said quietly.
But of course he is, Miss Groom protested. He's a lost boy. He doesn't even know who he is.
He was lost for one day, said Miss Josie. Miss Groom seemed to swell even larger.
Miss Josie, I don't understand this at all. What right have the Beans to keep a boy like this?
John happens to be visiting the Beans, Miss Josie replied firmly. That is all that is necessary for anyone to know.
Well, this is certainly very strange. If the boy's parents are unknown, who gave him permission to stay at the Beans? I think this should be looked into. I also think there should be a medical report on the boy. I think I have a right to insist—
Miss Groom, Miss Josie interrupted quietly. I quite understand your feelings about the matter, but much more is known about John than can ever be told here. He has every right to visit the Beans for as long as they wish. It is very unfortunate that he happened to be drawn into the public eye when so much depends upon secrecy." Miss Josie uttered the last word as if she were touching upon high matters of state. It had an immediate effect upon her audience. Anderson Bush and Mr. McPhee blinked, and Miss Groom was visibly deflated. "So I must insist," Miss Josie continued, "that all of you say nothing whatsoever about what you have learned here. Not even the fact that Mr. Bean has done intelligence work. Your silence is extremely important. There'll be questions, and you can help by making light of this, and saying it was all a mistake. And it was a mistake. A terrible one." She stood up. "Thomas, I'll be out to see you as soon as I possibly can. Mr. Bush, please escort the Beans outside and keep those foolish people away from them." It was over, this part of it at least, but the rest of it was just beginning. Little John knew that as they started for home. Miss Josie had ordered secrecy from everyone, though not for an instant had she believed no one would talk. Money was bound to make someone talk. That thought had been in Miss Josie's mind when they left. He said to Thomas and Mary, "I'm sorry for what happened in the courtroom, but I couldn't think of any other way to solve things." "You had to do it," said Thomas. "There wasn't any other way." Mary said, "You certainly gave Anderson Bush a jolt, and the rest of them too. Anyway, you prepared Miss Josie for what Thomas had written. She was able to make up her mind quickly and decide what to do. She's a remarkable woman. I wish we'd gone to her when we first found you." "That was our mistake," Thomas mumbled. "But we had no idea anything like this was going to happen. Now too many people know John's a mind reader." "Oh dear," said Mary. "If the papers ever get it..." "They'll get it. The first reporter that waves some cash under Gilby's nose will learn all about it, with trimmings. The same goes for Angus, in spite of the trouble he's in." They turned into the driveway at last. It was good to be back and hear Roscoe barking a greeting. Little John got out and started happily for the enclosure, then stopped as the kitchen door flew open, and Brooks and Sally raced towards them. Something was wrong. Sally looked frightened. Brooks was angry.
"Hey, Dad! Look what somebody threw on our porch a few minutes ago!"
Brooks thrust out a crumpled piece of wrapping paper.
"It was folded around a stone."
After his lessons, Little John had no difficulty reading what was on the paper. Thomas held it for all to see. Crudely written in large letters were the words, "This is a warning. Get rid of that wild boy and do it quick." He heard Mary's gasp and was aware of Thomas's sudden fury. "Mr. Bean," he said before Thomas could speak, "if I stay here, I might be a danger to all of you. Maybe it would be better if I went to that place we found. I could camp there with Rascal."
"No," snapped Thomas. "This is your home. I'll be hanged if I let any weaselly bunch of idiots drive you away from here. Brooks, did you get a look at the person who threw this?"
"No, Dad. Sally and I were in the garden when it happened. We heard Rascal bark, and then the stone hit the porch. There wasn't anybody in sight. But a little later, I heard a car start up somewhere down the fork. Did you pass anybody on the road?"
"No. He must have taken the West Fork when he drove away after sneaking up here through the trees. It had to be Angus or Gilby or a relative. There's a bunch of them counting the Blue Lake people, and they're all related. And they're all afraid now." Suddenly Thomas laughed. "After John's exhibition in court this morning, they all know what he can do, and they're scared to death of him."
Mary said worriedly, "I don't see anything funny in this, Thomas. Some of these people are moonshiners. They could be dangerous."
"If they threaten us again, I'll have to show them that John and I can be more dangerous."
"Daddy," said Sally, "did John read minds in court this morning?"
"He sure did, honey. That's why those people are afraid."
Sally laughed.
"They'd be more afraid if they knew he came from Mars or someplace, wouldn't they?"
"Sally," Mary exclaimed.
"Whatever,"
Brooks said.
"I told you it couldn't be Mars, Sally. There's not enough air on it. It has to be a planet like ours. Isn't that right, John?"
"I think so," Little John answered. "But since I can't remember..."
Thomas was staring hard at Brooks, and suddenly Brooks burst out,
"Aw, Dad, stop trying to hide it from us. Sally and I have had plenty of time to figure it out. Why, anybody who can do the things John can just couldn't be from our planet. He's too smart."
"Okay, son, you know the answer, but keep your hatch battened on it. Too many things are being learned about John already, and tomorrow the papers may be full of it. Before anything else happens, he's got to get his memory back."
Little John thought of the cave. He was anxious to return to it, but it was too late to start and get back before dark. They would have to wait until morning. Every visit had produced something, if only another carving. He had done 3, the head of a man older than the first, and another of a woman who Mary Bean believed was his mother. He hoped so. She was so beautiful, and she seemed so wise. Strange how his fingers seemed to remember things that his mind couldn't, but the thought shadows were always there. Soon they would take form. He was sure of that. Rain was slashing down in torrents the next morning. Little John stared at it in dismay. Thomas said, "It ought to pass in an hour or so. We'll get ready and leave the moment it clears." It was barely daybreak, and they dawdled over breakfast. They were hardly finished when the telephone rang. Little John answered it. Miss Josie was calling.
"John," she said, "I don't suppose any of you seen the morning papers yet?"
"No, ma'am. Mr. Bean doesn't take it daily."
"Well, I've just seen 2, and I'll try to get more. I think we'd better have a conference. Tell Mary I'm inviting myself to lunch. It's the only time I can get away."
In spite of the rain, it was a busy morning. 2 cars containing out-of-town reporters and photographers came. Thomas had an unpleasant but firm session with them on the porch. They left the house, but refused to leave the area. Long-distance calls began coming over the phone. A publishing syndicate wanted exclusive rights to John O'Connor's story. A nightclub offered a staggering amount of money for 2 weeks of personal appearances and mind-reading. By the time Miss Josie's little car spun into the lane, Thomas was fit to be tied. Miss Josie said,
"I wish I wasn't in such a rush, but everything seems to be happening at once for all of us. Thomas, look at these."
She spread an Atlanta paper and 2 others on the table. On the front page of 2 papers were pictures snapped at the courthouse. Under them were long stories. One was headed, "Mind-Reading Genius Discovered in Mountains." Another began, "Wild Boy Reads Minds, Clears Self of Theft Charges." The one without pictures had a 2-column box headed, "Who is John O'Connor?" All the known facts had been printed. These were filled in with highly colored rumors and questions. Mary gasped. "It's worse than I ever—"
"It's what I was afraid of,"
said Miss Josie.
"and it's only the start."
She looked at Brooks and Sally.
"How much do they know?"
"Everything," said Thomas. "We didn't tell them. They guessed it."
"If they guessed," said Miss Josie, "others will too in time. John, have you any idea how valuable you can be to some people?"
Little John was shocked by what she was thinking. I didn't realize that this country has enemies. You believe they might— is kidnap the word?"
"Yes. I'm just looking ahead, John. Nothing at all may happen, but we'll have to plan for the worst. There are some smart people in this world, and some of them are very dangerous. You said one thing in court yesterday that didn't worry me at the time, but it frightens me now. Someone was bribed to tell it. It's in all 3 papers. Here it is. The thoughts of everyone in this room are so loud that they might just as well be shouting."
"Good grief!" Thomas exclaimed. "I should have realized the danger of that myself. Why, there are agencies in our own government that, if they knew what John can do—"
"Exactly," said Miss Josie. "Thomas, I had a call from my brother in Washington this morning."
"The one in the War Department?"
"Yes, he had just got up. He saw a piece in his paper about John and read that it had happened in my court. He was so curious he phoned me immediately. He was entirely too curious, Thomas, and he mentioned that we might have a visitor."
Miss Josie paused, then asked,
"Did you ever hear of a Colonel Eben Quinn?"
I once had to deal with a Major Eben Quinn. Tall, thin, very pale. The only thing I'll ever repeat about him is that I'm glad he's not working for our enemies."
"Well, he's a colonel now," said Miss Josie. "No one knows what department he's connected with, but he has power. Entirely too much for a colonel. Thomas, I think we'd better hide John. For his own safety, I think we should get him away from these mountains to some place where he won't be recognized."
Little John said, "But I can't leave, Miss Josie. I have to stay here."
"Why, John?"
Thomas said, "Let me explain, Miss Josie. He doesn't dare leave here or he'll never get back to where he came from. There's a connection in this area, something magnetic that forms his only means of return. He has to regain his memory here and be close by when his people come looking for him. And from what we've learned, we're sure they will."
"Oh my, this does complicate things.
She frowned and looked at little John and said almost absently, "I wish you had your memory and that I had hours to talk to you instead of minutes. I must have read what Thomas wrote about you 100 times last night. It gave me a glimpse of what a peaceful and wonderful place your world must be, and how strange and terrible ours must look to you. John, the awful part is what people here would do to you if they could. They'd use you. They'd pay no attention to the good you could give. They'd use your mind to help fight their secret battles, and no matter which side got you, nothing would be changed. It would still go on." Miss Josie shook her head suddenly. "I've got to think of something, Thomas. There's a legal side to this that worries me. By law, you and Mary have no real authority to keep John. Before some agency tries to take him away, I'd better have papers drawn up giving you temporary custody of him." She stopped and stared out the front window. "Oh no, look at these cars on the road. Silly people coming to gape. That settles it, Thomas. You'll have to have a guard here." Brooks said, "Miss Josie, I think we need a guard. Look what someone threw on the porch yesterday." He showed her the piece of wrapping paper with the warning on it. Her face tightened as she read it. "I don't like this, Thomas." "What can they do?" said Thomas. "One of Gilby's bunch wrote it, I'm sure. They're just scared." Still, Thomas paused and began snapping his fingers. "After what's in the paper, someone may try to use them. They're fools enough to let some clever person—" "Yes," said Miss Josie. "That's exactly why they're dangerous. Thomas, I'm going to send a deputy out here this afternoon and try to get another one for night duty. I'm not sure I can manage a night man. You know how our sheriff is. If he smelled smoke, he wouldn't believe there's fire unless it burned his nose. Anyway, I'll fix up those papers as soon as possible." That afternoon, a young deputy drove out, parked his car near the edge of the lane, and stood waving traffic on while he barred the lane to visitors. His presence, however, did not prevent a television truck from stopping under the trees at the far side of the road. Its crew set up a camera on a high platform and began taking pictures of the growing traffic and everything happening on the Bean property. When the young deputy went off duty that evening, no one came to take his place. He had been gone hardly 10 minutes when a stone crashed through one of the front windows. Wrapped around it was a piece of paper covered with another crudely lettered warning. "Get rid of that wild boy. We mean business." "Where's this thing going to end?" Thomas muttered angrily as he nailed a board over the broken pane.
Well now, wasn't that quite the chapter, eh? Things are getting quite serious. Threats flying left and right at the Beans and Little John, and Brooks and Sally finally letting on that they knew that Little John was not from around here the entire time. But what will they do, with their lives in grave danger? Will the forces of evil descend, or will Little John and the Beans manage to get away? Well, we'll have to wait until next time, won't we? Now then, we'd like to thank you all for watching and ask that you click like, share, and subscribe below. And as always, we remind you that you are loved, that you are strong, and that you are not alone. I'm Percival. Thank you for watching.